So we're going to do a tutorial that shows how to work with layers in Photoshop to make animated GIFs with multiple layers, so you can do a large variety of things, more than just say import a video and loop a portion of it. So we're going to work with this Flickr user, Patricia M. has a lot of archival photos in her account, and I came across these 4 images which were part of a game that allowed you to just generate faces, and I thought this would be a lot of fun to animate these. So I've downloaded these files, and because these are CC licensed, you get to see the download link. One of the nice pieces of happiness that goes with Creative Commons licensing is that when you Creative Commons tag something Creative Commons in Flickr, the download link is available. So with them downloaded, I'm going to do what we've done before, which is load these 4 images in a stack, so they're layers. So we're going to use that tool, the scripts, load files to a stack. These are in my downloads folder, most recent. There they are. And that takes just a second. Okay, so now we have 4 layers with these 4 images, and we're going to need to do some choices. What do we want to use? Green face or white face? Green face, white face? Green face. All right. So we're going to use the green face, and you're going to notice I'm just turning off layers on and off. And so the first thing is, we're going to need to pick some elements for this facial features, but layers matter, like the order of layers matter to what's on top. Now, because there's this white background, you're seeing the green face hidden. So the first thing we need to do is, how do we get rid of this white background? All right. There's so many different ways to do this in Photoshop. We're going to focus on using the Magic Wand tool, or you can even what's called the Quick Selection tool. But the Magic Wand, we'll start with the Magic Wand tool. And the important thing to notice is there's technically settings for it. It's the default settings. This tolerance level is the most important one. This says, like, when I click on a color range, all right, in this case it happens to be white, select, because if we zoom crazy close in, what's white is, the contrast of the screen sucks. There we go. Depending on the edges, this is pretty darn white. I can't tell because I'm looking at a projection which has a really crappy contrast, but I'm assuming those whites are slightly variable. So, but we wouldn't want to get this white eyeball, or we don't want to get these white teeth. And you can see, thankfully, they are a different color white. When you zoom in, you can realize these are made up of pixels that are slightly different. So if the range is too large, you're going to select not just this white, but you're going to select these teeth. So you might have to adjust those parameters. And then you can always clean up later, and I'll show you a good way to clean things up. So we can see pretty good job. I clicked just once, and suddenly now we have all of that white selected. You can tell it's not the object selected because you see this dancing ants line that's all the way around. If it happens to be useful to do that, you can select the inverse, and now actually all the various facial features are selected. So select inverse is actually quite useful in various circumstances. So we're going to go back to that selection, and then I'm just going to hit delete. And now suddenly, and I'm going to hit, to deselect everything, I'm just going to say Command D. All right, so now I have all these pieces, and I'm going to switch to the main move tool, which is with the letter V. And you can see these are all here. So, but I still have a problem. I have to pick some pieces I'm going to use, and these are going to all have to be in their own layers because we're going to move them. So we already had someone wants to use the mustache, so we're going to use the mustache. So in order to select just this mustache, there's a few different ways to do this, but I'm using Command Spacebar to zoom in. And that's very useful. And if I add the Option key, I can change it to a minus magnifying glass and zoom out. So getting to know your keyboard shortcuts are really useful. If you have a laptop with you can use two fingers to, whoops. You can zoom in by spreading your fingers apart or zoom out. I don't like to use that. I'm so used to it. So I'm so used to the keyboard shortcuts. Holding the space bar brings up the hand so I can scroll around while zoomed in, so that's very useful as well. I'm going to use this lasso, they call it a Polygonal Lasso tool. So I can make points, and I'm just clicking. So it doesn't matter that I get it exactly because everything around it there's nothing there. There's no pixels. I just have to be careful as I go through by this nose. And I'm going around, and then I go back to the original point. Boop. And so now that area is selected, which includes a lot of transparency, but the mustache is in there. And I'm just going to say edit, copy, edit, paste. All right. And now, zoom back out, I've got a mustache. Now it's layer 1, and it's smart because there's going to be a bunch of these layers. Let's name this. This is mustache. All right. So that I can remember it, I switch back to the move tool, hitting the letter V, and now I can position that mustache. I've got my first object. So now we got to get some eyes, right? Let's turn the mustache off temporarily by just turning the eyeball. Which eye? We have these eyes. Here, let's do the same thing with these parts. We can all these facial features. Let's do the same thing. Delete, Command D to deselect everything. Red eyeballs, slanted eyeballs, blue slanted eyes. Any shout outs? Don't care. Huh? The blue ones? These? Okay, we'll use the red eye pupiled eyeballs. It's the same thing. All right. Now it's really important to have the layer that you do the selection, the copy pasting, and the highlighted layer. So if I had this layer visible and selected, even though the selection, I made it around that, I'm actually going to, if I do copy paste, I've now selected these two little bits. All right, so that's not what I was looking to do. If you make mistakes, it's really useful to use the history palette or Command Z. You can do say edit, undo, paste, all right, and it brings back my selection. But there's also what's called the history palette, and if it's not in this default bar, you can always say go to Window and look for history, all right. And you can go back as many steps up to whatever set for the application. I think this is set at like 20 around. That looks like about 20, maybe 25. And you can go back and then go back forward until you do a change. So the history palette's really useful when managing what you're doing. So it was that one. So we're going to copy. We have this layer highlighted, so I'm going to say copy paste. And now I have eyeballs, right? And we'll turn this off. We can zoom out. We can turn our mustache back on so we can see it. And now, notice that my eyeballs are kind of sideways. And that's not, I want them to be, and I also think like, you know, the default game had eyeballs that are kind of small. I want to make them bigger. All right, so there's a way to transform the particular layer versus the whole palette. So one of the other tutorials, we looked at overall image size, and you can change the entire image size of the entire palette. Right now, this is a pretty big digital image, and you'd want to make this smaller before you export it to an animated GIF, because 2500 by 3500 pixels is a pretty big image for the web, especially an animated GIF. So ignoring that for now, we have this eyeballs layer highlighted, and we're going to go edit, transform, or free transform, which is Command T. That's another keyboard shortcut to get to know. Command T. And it's important to hold down the Shift key if you want to maintain aspect ratio. So if I don't have the Shift key down, I can distort this. And if you want to do that, that's cool. But if I hold the Shift key down, I can maintain the aspect ratio in the way that I want. All right. So I'm gonna do that. And then if I go to the outside of this, I can see that little rotate tool, and I can rotate this. I can rotate it all the way around if I want to do that. Which, yeah, I like that way better. All right. And so there we go. Okay, so we've got 2 layers. Now we obviously could get a ton more stuff, but just for the sake of the tool, now I'm going to show 2 types of transformations across the layer. So, and then maybe if we have time, we'll do one more thing for fun. So, same thing, we have the timeline visible, and if you don't remember, it's window timeline has to be checked to see that timeline, and we can create a frame animation. So right now, we have a frame, and we're going to just change it to 0.1 seconds. And you'll see that there are 3 layers visible in that frame. Okay? I can duplicate this frame, and I can turn off the eyes, and now you can see in the little teeny preview the eyes are not on and the eyes are on. And so I could just loop this, and you can see his eyeballs showing and not showing over and over and over again. And that's the first thing to recognize in working with layers for frames. It's the layers are visible based on whatever you select per frame. All right. You can also do small movements. So if I have this frame active, highlighted, and I grab the mustache, whoops, I have to have that layer highlighted. I have to have the mustache layer highlighted. And then I move it. Now you can see that mustache is higher and that mustache is lower. And I now have the mustache moving and the eyes, coming on and off. So those are 2 basic things you can do with objects that you've created on top of layers. Now we have all these different pieces we could add. We can add mouths and things like that. So I'm going to show one more thing, one more way to do some more complex movement that you can't do just by simply moving the object frame to frame. Because notice, one of the things I can't do is I can't make the mustache bigger and smaller. All right, there have to be in Photoshop. You can't do that. You'd have to change. You have to make multiple versions of the mustache of various sizes, and then cycle through them in different frames. And notice that when I turn on a new frame that hasn't been on, notice it's visible in all layers. Okay. And that can be frustrating, but it's part of the timeline options that new layers visible in all frames. That wasn't checked actually. So it's not a new layer, it's just I turned it on. So sometimes it's going to be useful to highlight multiple frames and turn a layer off. All right, so it's something to realize you can do. But now that we have couple frames, these things are going to start to show up there. So let's get, say, this mouth. And same thing. We have to make sure that layer is highlighted. Copy, paste. All right. We can turn this off. And all right. So one of the things that's useful is, say, the mouth. You can see it's not visible in both frames. So in this frame, it's not visible while the eyes aren't either. So let's actually turn the eyeballs on there. So the mouth is just in one frame. I can go to the other frame and turn the, let's name this mouth, and turn it around and make it visible. Now the cool thing is, if I use that free transform, this is a way of moving an object that is affected by all frames. So if there's something that you want to make sure moves in every frame, you don't want to use the move tool. If I use the move tool and move this down, notice it's only happened in this frame, not that frame. All right, that's problematic. But you can make sure something moves in all frames by using that free transform, because it allows movement of layers, not just turning them and resizing them. So if I go back to that edit free transform, I can rotate it as I'd want to, but I can also move it, and notice it's not showing it there, but it will when I'm done. And I'll resize it. Let's make it bigger. Return. And so you can see now it's in both layers. All right. So we have that mustache move. All right. And we have that mouth move. Now I'm going to teach you one kind of fun tool to really do an unusual manipulation of a layer called the puppet warp. So let's say I wanted to have two different, let's do two things. First, let's do something simple. Let's say in this layer I want to have small eyeballs, in this layer I want to have big eyeballs, right? So I'd have to duplicate this eyeballs layer. All right, first I'd turn it off, and then I'm going to duplicate the layer. And we can edit the name, and we'll just say eyeballs bigger. Okay, and I'll turn it on for just this layer. And now if I Command-T free transform, I can change their size, return, and between the two layers we have different size eyeballs. So you can see it's bouncing between the eyeballs layer in the first frame and the eyeballs bigger layer in the second frame. So as I go back and forth, I've got two pieces of movement going on. All right. So those are different kinds of movement, and in the case of making something larger, there's the need to duplicate the layer. Now the last manipulation I'm going to teach you is how to, let's turn this mouth off, do a really complicated manipulation instead of, using what's called puppet warp, which allows you to do really complex, and this is mouth warp. And now I can turn that on. So this is this mouth right here, and I have it intentionally below the mustache. And I'm going to say image, edit, puppet warp, and now there's this crazy mesh that's around that mouth. And what happens is I can make these points that I can move, all right? And I'm going to make just these 5. And so now I can spread the mouth out, and so that way I can pinch the bottom up, all right? I can pull the bottom down, and then it makes a new version. So now I have a more sophisticated, kind of unusual manipulation. So you could do things like change the shape of the mustache. So the mustache kind of flaps like its wings, so that you could distort this so the mustache kind of twirls up and down, depending on how many different versions you make. You know, we're being really simple here and doing 2 different versions, all right? So now we have 2 versions of the layer, and that's what's going on. Okay. And so to finish this off, I'll show you a couple of examples of faces I made using this thing. Here's one where this is 21 frames, and that's switching between eyes. I also ended up, you can see in this eye, pull this off, the blinking, this required me to make versions of the eye that I erased portions of each eye, all right? So I had to make a version and then cut off the top using the simple eraser tool, all right? So you can see there's a lot of different layers I had in this thing to get this to work, and so I tried my best to label them. Let me see if I can find the eyes. Where are they? Oh, here we go. Narrow blue eyes too. Looks like, and then, so there's two eyes, and so each of them are there. So then if I go here, oh, look at that! I did it a different way. I actually added this little bit on top of it. I just, instead of cutting them, the eyes, I added extra skin, if you will, on top. All right. And this mouth movement is puppet warp. You can see that's puppet warp mouth, just bouncing back and forth between a couple versions. So it looks like he's burping, right? Yep, I added a second pair of eyes, yeah, for the sake of, you know, making him look alarmed, like he's burping. All right. And so, you know, the last thing to do is then export these as a GIF. So I'm going to export this version. So first we should check its size to make sure it's reasonable. That's pretty big. We're going to make this, first I'm actually going to get rid of this excess space. I'm going to use the crop tool to get rid of any excess space that's not necessary. And hit return to confirm the selection. And now it's just working with the space that I need. And then I'm going to change the image size of this to 500, which is Tumblr maximum width. All right. So now if I save for web, and this is well under a megabyte, which is good. They actually allow up to 2 megabytes now for Tumblr. And I save this say 500. And we can check it in the browser. And there we go. So that's it. Now, I mean, this used a couple extra processes, but for the most part, it's pretty much what I showed you. I did use what's called the clone stamp to make this extra pieces of skin, if you will. But what I described of making versions of the eyes and cutting them with the eraser tool would have worked as well. So there's a quick little tutorial of how to, you know, work with layers in Photoshop in multiple frames, as well as some selections, some puppet warping, some moving, and things like that across these various layers. So that's it.